Hey guys, welcome to the 14. I'm Nick Cole. We're breaking down each SEC football game in Week 12 from a betting perspective. Today, we're talking about the Auburn Tigers visiting the South Carolina Gamecocks. This game's on Saturday, November 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time at Williams-Brice Stadium in Columbia, South Carolina. This game will be televised on ESPN. From a betting perspective, Auburn opened as a 10-point favorite in this game, and that line's moved to 7.5 as of Thursday afternoon. The over-under opened at 47.5, and that's dropped to 44.5 as of the recording of this video. I'll bring in our betting analyst, Christopher Smith. Christopher, this might be one of the better games on a weak SEC slate this week. How do you feel about this East-West matchup?
Yeah, it certainly could be. This in the Florida-Missouri game, at least judging by the line, should be the most competitive game. And you mentioned the line moving from 10 to 7.5. I think a lot of that was in part to the Bo Nix injury, which I'm sure you'll talk about in a minute, but that was announced after the opening line came out on Sunday. But why don't you tell us, in addition to the injuries, the weather and also Nick's news and notes?
Sure. So let's start with the weather. On Saturday in Columbia, we're looking at temperatures in the 40s for that evening game. No rain in the forecast, and the wind's going to be pretty mild from 3 to 5 miles an hour. So nothing too big to be concerned about. On the injury side of things, you mentioned it. We'll start with Auburn. Obviously, starting quarterback Bo Nix is out for the season with an injury there at his leg. Also, they lost kicker Anders Carlson to a leg injury for the rest of the season. So maybe a little bit of an impact on the total in this game without the somewhat reliable leg of a Carlson kicking for Auburn. Star defender Owen Popo didn't play last week. From week to week, we don't really know if he's going to play or not. It's an injury that seems to have been bothering him for a while. He came back, and now he's not playing again. And so I'd check on Saturday to be sure whether you're going to see him or not. What we should know, based on some reports that have come out of Auburn this week, is that edge defender Romello Height is expected to play after missing the last 3 games. So that's some good news for the Tigers on a week where they had some pretty bad news. On the South Carolina side of things, quarterback Zeb Nolan did not play last week. It seems like he should be available to play this week, although it sounds like they're going to start with Brown as the starting quarterback for the Gamecocks after he started the last couple of games. They're getting more comfortable with him. The team's best offensive lineman and defensive lineman have been out. Team's best linebacker is out. Wide receiver Rico Powers is out. And defensive back Jalen Dickerson is questionable. So a few things to be concerned about going into Saturday for the Gamecocks as well. Going on to the news and notes, let's start with Auburn. It's hard to talk about them without recounting what happened to them in Week 11 against Mississippi State. Auburn scored touchdowns on its first 4 possessions and jumped out to a 28-3 lead against the Bulldogs in the early second quarter of that game. And if you turned off the TV and thought, hey, I'm going to cash this Auburn -5 ticket or whatever you had in your hand, but you were in for a rude awakening in the second half because Mississippi State not only rallied, but they scored 40 unanswered points to hand the Tigers their 4th loss of the season and to win that game outright. It brings me to the next point about the Tigers. It's TJ Finley time, like it or not. This is a big kid. He's 6'7", 246, got a pretty big arm. It's going to be interesting to see him get an extended look as a guy who knows he's going to play the whole game and potentially the rest of the season for the Tigers. Last year, he actually got to play against South Carolina last year as a member of LSU's team. He completed 81% of his passes against the Gamecocks last year for 265 yards and a pair of touchdowns. So you got a guy who at least knows a little bit about playing the Gamecocks, although I would say that was under Will Muschamp and much different scenario for that program. And then looking at South Carolina before I hand it over to you for the betting analysis. Hey, they lost a close one on the road last week against Mizzou. The Tigers won 31-28 in Columbia, Missouri. And the thing that I would take away from that game, Christopher, is the battle of the rushing attacks and how Tigers outrushed South Carolina 258 yards to 57. And that's just a week after the Gamecocks had a pair of 100-yard rushers in that win against Florida. So they really just failed to get anything going against one of the worst run defenses in FBS. It's kind of a puzzling outcome. Christopher, from a betting perspective, how do we take what South Carolina did, take where Auburn's at with the injury at quarterback, and make a sound decision?
Yeah, I mean, let's start with the quarterback. I do think that people are not giving Bo Nix enough credit. I mean, I think he's been very good this year. Not necessarily, All-American good or whatever else, but if you just isolate how well he's played and if you give him like a good group of receivers around him instead of what he has, I think he probably, people don't recognize how good of a season he's had. So I do think that moving to TJ Finley is a major downgrade, both in terms of passing and running the ball. But I also think that matters very little for this specific game, because this is going to be one of those old school line of scrimmage SEC games, in my opinion. And I mean, South Carolina is on its third quarterback. Auburn's on its second. Neither team has good receivers or electric skill players. So to me, this handicap is about which side can impose its will in the trenches. And if you look at some of the advanced stats, I think it's super, super, super clear that there's a huge advantage for Auburn in the trenches on both sides of the ball, but especially when South Carolina has the ball. Speaking of South Carolina, St. Francis transfer, Jason Brown, that's a former 2-star recruit. You would want a running game to help him a little bit, right? Since he doesn't have receivers and not super talented pedigree wise. Well, South Carolina is 127th in line yards, 115th in stuff rate, 120th in passing down sack rate. Not great numbers when you're trying to help out a guy who started the season as the third quarterback. Now, on the other side of the ball, Auburn is 8th in standard down line yards and 18th in power success rate, 35th in stuff rate. This is their defensive line. So huge advantage to Auburn here. And compared to last game, Auburn should have the ball more time of possession, more snaps, better field position than they did against a Mississippi State offense that ripped them apart. Now, when Auburn has the ball, South Carolina's defensive line is 121st in line yards, 127th in power success rate, 125th in stuff rate. And Auburn's 33rd in line yards, 26th in stuff rate, their offensive line. So I expect Auburn to force feed the ball to Tank Bigsby and Jarquez Hunter. And because South Carolina's offense should be so outmatched in this game, I mean, they rushed for 57 yards against Missouri. And I think they'll eventually wear down in the second half. Auburn should just stick to pounding the football, commit to the run. And by the end of the game, we should see Auburn breaking through a little bit. So, Nick, who are you betting on this game, and let us know why?
Well, Christopher, before I give you my pick, I want to give our readers, listeners, and watchers a chance to double their money on what they can bet on this game. Our partnership with Action 24/7 is creating an opportunity here for new customers there for a limited time only to get their deposit matched 100% up to $800. So if you sign up today and make your first deposit using the code SOUTH14, that's SOUTH14, Action will double your money up to $800. You need to download the app or go to visit action247.com to get things started. Action 24/7 is by Tennesseans for Tennesseans. You've got Action. And so last week I had Action on Auburn. So I was one of those guys early in the second quarter who was already counting my winnings, the proverbial counting the chickens before they hatch. And unfortunately, it fell victim to that 40 unanswered points from the Pirate and Mississippi State. So as I make this pick this week, I do it cringing, thinking about how they lost Bo Nix, but I'm going back to Auburn again. I'm going to lay the 7.5. I think you laid a very strong case for why the Tigers are simply just a better team than South Carolina, and even going on the road, playing with a backup quarterback, laying more than a touchdown. Obviously, I'd love to shop around to get that on the right side of the touchdown for laying numbers, but for the purposes of our picks, I'll lay the 7.5. And I also like the under 44.5. I don't see South Carolina scoring a whole lot of points in this game, and with a backup quarterback and propensity to run the ball if they're able to, I kind of lean to Auburn not scoring a whole lot either. So give me the under, give me Auburn. How do you feel about it?
Well, I like your progression as a bettor here, starting to look at the numbers and trying to shop for the best line. And I don't think you'll see anything less than Auburn -7 the rest of the way. It did dip briefly to -6.5, and it just got hammered the minute that happened by a bunch of sharp bettors. So I'm with you in terms of the number. Obviously, it would have been nice to get 6.5, but I still feel comfortable with Auburn -7.5. I think that especially when South Carolina has the football, I feel very, very confident in Auburn's defense and very, very sure that South Carolina is going to struggle mightily to even get to 20 points in this game. So for that reason, I'm okay with Auburn 7.5. Definitely follow Nick's advice in terms of trying to find the best line that you can. But I'm also on the under 45, 4.5. I think Auburn should just run the ball some more. And South Carolina's offense is going to struggle mightily. So for Nick Cole, I'm Christopher Smith for the 14, and we'll talk to you next week.